My name is JulianaPlucinik, and my multicultural psychology final presentation comes from the book entitled White Privilege: Essential Readings on the Other Side of Racism, written by Paula S. Rothenberg. Before jumping into my essay that I covered, I just want to go ahead and quickly introduce the author, Dr. Beverly Tatum, who is a professor at Spelman College, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. And so she actually is a prominent author. She wrote Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, which has become a national bestseller, as well as several other essays and journals, and does active research regarding racism and equality in the United States. And so just wanted to kind of introduce you guys to her and the work that she's interested in. My presentation focuses on part 4 of the book entitled Whiteness, the Power of Resistance, and I looked at chapter 1, Breaking the Silence, which is written by Professor Beverly Tatum, who was briefly introduced on the previous slide. And this essay primarily focuses on encouraging and promoting meaningful, productive dialogue that raises consciousness and ultimately leads to effective action and social change. Professor Tatum opens this essay by reminding readers of deliberate acts of racism from the east to west coast of the United States. She highlights these incidents in the essay to primarily prevent individuals from claiming that racism is simply something of the past and is no longer something that Americans need to talk about, focus on. And the first set of examples she mentions are race riots. The first race riot that she talks about is in 1992 in Los Angeles, California, that lasted for approximately a week after 4 police officers attacked Rodney King, were acquitted of all charges. 12 years later, another race riot took place in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014 after a Caucasian police officer was acquitted of shooting and killing an unarmed African American, Michael Brown, and this officer shot him in the back. And just as a reminder, these race riots did not occur because it was a Caucasian officer and a black community member, but because in both cases there was no justice for either of the victims, as the police officers were both acquitted. Professor Tatum briefly comments on the anti-immigrant legislation in California that has led to harassment of Latino citizens, and she also reminds readers of the incident of anti-Asian violence that has increased dramatically in the recent years. Readers are then reminded of the largest racial discrimination lawsuit against an American oil company, Texaco, in 1996. And this suit was filed by an employee who was consistently denied chances for advancement, seminars, and foreign travel, while less qualified white employees, often people she herself had trained, moved ahead. And Texaco, after being recorded making discriminatory slurs, agreed to finally pay $176 million to settle this suit. Professor Tatum encourages both her students and readers to talk about racism wherever they can. There are several concerns that her students have about race, and Professor Tatum tells readers to talk about them at home, at work, at school, in the community, and even in our places of worship. Some fears her students have when she asks them to do this are as follows. How do I engage in meaningful dialogue about racial issues? How do I get past my fear? How do I get past my anger? Am I willing to take the risk of speaking up? Can I trust that there will be others to listen and support me? Will it make a difference anyway? Is it worth the effort? This essay continues with segments of her students' personal journal entries. Fear is a primary theme that I identified in all student entries, regardless of ethnicity. One white college student noted that, quote, "Racism has been a totally new concept to me. It was not something I ever grew up talking about at the dinner table or anywhere else." End quote. One black parent noted that speaking to a white teacher about racial insensitivity is extremely anxiety-provoking. This mother states that she had to rehearse in the bathroom several times before meeting with the teacher. But if she did not advocate for her son, then who would? Dr. Tatum encourages her students to speak about their experiences and not to remain silent. She continues by saying that, quote, "To remain silent would be to disconnect from her own experience, internalizing her own oppression," end quote. One quote that I read that really helped me see this classroom as progressive and open-minded group of students states, quote, "In the same way, we need to break the silence about sexism, anti-Semitism, heterosexism, and homophobia, classism, ageism, and ableism. In my experience, once we learn to break the silence about one ism, the lessons learned transfer to other isms." The Color of Fear is an award-winning documentary that Professor Beverly Tatum showed to her students. She then shared their journal entry responses in her essay. After discovering that Utah State University had the DVD on file, I rented it to understand the comments she and her students made about the film a little better. There were 2 additional comments that I pulled from this film to help better explain their conversation. This documentary brings 8 ethnically diverse men together for a weekend-long confrontation of what it means to be an American. One quote that Professor Tatum shares in her essay comes from the powerful dialogue between 2 men. David, a white man who identifies as American, can be found continually invalidating the experiences of Victor, who identifies as African American and Native American. Victor starts out responding calmly and then transitions to shouting angrily towards David. Victor states, quote, "When I hear, 'Why can't we just treat people as human beings?' to me, when I hear it from a white person, means why can't we all pretend to be white people? I'll pretend you're a white person and then you can pretend to be white. Why don't you eat what I eat? Why don't you drink what I drink? Why don't you think what I think? Why don't you feel like I feel?" End quote. Moments later, Victor states, quote, "What that says to me is don't be yourself, be like me, keep me comfortable, connect when I'm ready to connect," end quote. Responding to a comment that David made earlier, Victor states, quote, "And when you say your ethnicity is American, there is no American ethnicity. You had to throw away your ethnicity to become an American. That's what it means." Unfortunately, these 3 quotes do little to properly recognize how well these men are able to discuss racial prejudices. Next, we are going to look at the students' responses towards this film and what new hopes they have for the future. Students in Professor Tatum's class identify the importance of listening, being vulnerable, and validating one another. One Asian American student stated, quote, "Victor's rage and anger was mine as well. I didn't know if I was justified in feeling that way," end quote. One white student stated, quote, "Often, I feel that because I am white, my feelings are disregarded or looked down upon in racial dialogues. I feel that my efforts are unappreciated," end quote. Later, the same student states, quote, "I acknowledge the need for white students to listen to minority students when they express anger without taking this communication as a personal attack." Professor Tatum identifies that, quote, "In order for there to be meaningful dialogue, fear, whether of anger or isolation, must eventually give way to risk and trust." One student concludes that, quote, "It's a very stressful process, but the consequences of not exploring racial issues are ultimately far more damaging," end quote. In Chapter 5 of The Psychology of Ethnic Groups in the United States, the authors, Organista, Marin, and Chun, comment on importance and salience, stating that, quote, ethnic identity is more important and salient for ethnic minorities compared to dominant group members due to experiences of racial stratification and discrimination, end quote. The authors describe 3 stages of ethnic identity development, with the third and final stage being an achieved ethnic identity. This final stage is comprised of developing an inner sense of security with their ethnic identity. During this stage, one can be seen appreciating the unique features of their own culture and of other cultures. Some ways that students today can encourage the conversation of race and ethnicity while also helping ourselves and others reach the third stage of ethnic identity is to 1. Identify, 2. Talk about, and 3. Appreciate unique differences and features of our own culture and of others. Dr. Beverly Tatum and her students suggest 3 ways we can improve the relationship across ethnicities and have productive dialogues today. Her first suggestion is willingness to be vulnerable about our feelings. The second suggestion is the willingness to listen to others without judgment. And the third suggestion is the resolve to validate and strive to understand others' experiences. Facilitator of The Color of Fear, Lee Man-hwa, suggests that those hoping to further close the divide of racism ask questions that inquire about personal experiences, such as, when did you first experience racism? Or what would you teach your children about racism? And finally, why do you think that being colorblind is a good thing? I would also recommend taking a personal investment of learning more about racism and multiculturalism by reading and reflecting on Google alerts that come to your email, and by reading multicultural books and articles that require you to reflect on your own thoughts and experiences. Thank you very much for taking the time to review my presentation. The references are also listed below in the comment section.